Greetings from the Kingdom of Nepal. Happy morning to you. Now Nepal is a democracy and everybody that's old enough to remember the king is wishing he was here. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's breath mastery, mindfulness of breath retention, and so forth. Of course, now it's a common form of meditation, but it certainly wasn't always. And I'd like to pay tribute to the pioneers who actually got the ball rolling. It's something I often think about as I practice breath mastery myself. And I'll take a moment to reflect on it. Think for a moment about the incredible patience and presence of mind and maybe intuition that the very, very first pioneers had to actually practice mindfulness of breath for any length of time. Someone, perhaps a farmer, perhaps a yogi, perhaps a merchant, had to pick up the thought, I wonder what would happen if I watched my breath. And probably this, it's not such an obvious thing. We all take our breath for granted. We all breathe and stuff. We don't, it's not something that you normally would think about, but somebody did. And that person not only thought about it, but he watched it, and he watched it maybe for a minute or two, and then, of course, nothing's going to happen in a minute or two, but he would have had to watch it for a half hour, or 5 minutes, and 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half hour, an hour. And even in that time, nothing at all is going to happen. But someone had the intuition to stick with it and say to themselves, well, maybe nothing's happening in an hour and just on this one day, but maybe if I tried it for 5 or 6 days or a week, something would happen. And not only they did that, but they had the patience, because nothing's going to happen in a week of practicing mindfulness. Somebody stuck with it and set up a disciplined practice without any results, thinking that, well, maybe it's going to take a couple of months of watching my breath every day to get any kind of results. And they did. They set up a practice and they got results. They were patient enough and had the intuition that it would work. And they were persistent too. So these pioneers I bow down to. I often think of you. So what is breath mastery? Well, basically it's just what it says, mastery of breath. It's the harnessing of the breath in such a way that it serves as a form of meditation, a meditation topic, and allows us to attain insight. And this is really no surprise that it has this capacity, because it's been long known by yogis, and even if we reflect in ourselves without any meditation background, the breath and thought is closely linked. Yogis knew this, but you don't have to be a yogi or even a meditator to know it. A little bit of reflection, all of us can see how the breath actually mirrors thoughts very well. We all know that when we get angry or something, our breath gets agitated also. If we're reading a book and we arrive at an interesting passage, it absorbs our mind and thought in that passage, our breath slows way down, and it might even stop momentarily as we get absorbed in our whatever we're reading. So as our emotions and thought patterns change, our breath also does. So the breath reflects thought. And yogis have said that if the breath stops, then thought stops. And if thought stops, the breath stops. So it is really works both ways. And that's why there's actually two paths, you know. You can divide two paths, enlightenment up into the paths of meditation into two by saying that you're either following the path of breath or you're following the path of mantras and analytical reasoning and thought and working with the thoughts rather than the breath. So ideally you would do both. You would work on both, using both each to complement the other. And this is what I personally do, and I think I know a lot of people do this. It's recommended if you have the time. Otherwise, you would choose where your affinities lie. If you feel comfortable with the practice of being mindful of the breath as your main meditation practice, or perhaps your only one, fine. It'll work. No matter how simple it is, it will work. If you feel comfortable with mantras, you can make that your main practice, or visualizations, or certain forms of analytical meditation, reasoning your way into reality. These diverse paths, they work singly or in combination, and it's for each individual to decide for themselves. But we're talking today about breath mastery and what it is. One of the beauties of mindfulness of breath, which is one aspect of breath mastery, one of the beauties of mindfulness of breath is its simple mechanics. It can be as simple as saying to yourself, I'm breathing in when you're breathing in, and I'm breathing out when you're breathing out. And continuing like this for a given length of time, the meditation session, whether it be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half hour, or an hour, whatever. Even in a short period of time, we will probably notice that when we are breathing in, we may be saying, I'm breathing out. And something taps us on the shoulder to make us aware that that's what's happening. This self-consciousness arises, that the coordination of the breath and the verbalization is not there. And if this happens, then we have lost mindfulness, and we bring ourselves back, and we start again in sync with our verbalization and the breath itself. So this is probably the simplest form of breath mastery, this mindfulness of breath. It's recommended sometimes when the nostrils feel warm, you label the out-breath. When the nostrils feel cool, because the air is going in, you label the in-breath. Generally, it's done in such a way And although it's so simple, because we have scattered thoughts, distracting thoughts, and we like to entertain thoughts, be amused by our thoughts, we will find that even labeling the breath correctly for 15 minutes is difficult. And breath, mindfulness of breath, is like a mirror and perfectly reflects just how distracted our mind normally is. That even something as simple as that, we really don't do very well. So, this is mindfulness of breath in its simplest form. Another kind of breath mastery would be breath retention. And it's also a kind of mindfulness with a little twist. You hold the breath also, or you control the breath. This is called pranayama. And pranayama is a practice that the mechanics are not always so simple. Sometimes they are, and sometimes the process gets very intricate. And I'll give you just a quick example so you get an idea. One of my favorite forms of pranayama is basically the simplest. I breathe in a very even, long breath, and when I get to the top of my inhale, I hold it. And then when I feel that I've held it long enough, I exhale with a slow, long breath, and I repeat the process. This is one form, and this is a very, very simple form. Ideally, in this form, you would breathe in for, let's just pick a number, 20 seconds, hold for 20 seconds, and exhale for 20 seconds. This is called sama pranayama. Sama means even. So that inhale and retention and exhale are all an even amount of time. So you can accomplish this by counting, listening to a timer, whatever. And you may also retain, in addition to at the inhale, at the top of the inhale, you may also retain on the top, at the exhale. And when you're done exhaling, retain before inhaling. So it could be something as like 20, 20, 20, 20. 20 on the inhale, 20 seconds on the inhale, 20 seconds on the retention on the top, 20 seconds on the exhale, and 20 seconds before inhaling again after the exhale. So this form is called sama, which means even in Sanskrit, pranayama. So pranayama is the path of prana, and prana is this inner energy that's not air that we all have. There's prana in air, but there's prana also in everything. And it's this kind of hidden energy, this powerful energy that animates our bodies and minds and gives life. Prana can be thought of as the life-giving force. So while air gives life too, and so does water and many other things, prana is hidden in a way. It's not, it's much more subtle. It's a subtle life-giving force in all of us. And so when we retain our breath, the idea is by depriving ourselves of air, our body seeks out the prana within. And this prana runs in the central channels and throughout our bodies constantly, but we're not always aware of it and plugged into it. And through the yogic discipline of pranayama, breath mastery, retention of breath, we gradually learn to rely on air less and prana more. And yogis that are really adept in pranayama completely subdue their breath, the outer breath, and the inner breath takes over. So in other words, they may retain their breath for a while and then go through several cycles of the pranayama just described, and then feel the prana within arising and no need to breathe. And this happens, this is called samadhi. And it happens through breath mastery. And those who are really skilled can remain in samadhi, breathless, for quite some time, hours sometimes. Those that are less skilled can retain their breath for several minutes. Sometimes they can retain a difficult cycle for a long time where they still rely on the air, but they're partially plugged into the prana as well. So there's various stages of this. And the mechanics of pranayama get very complicated. And those who really love the practice, and they make that their practice, they get involved in all of these different ways of practicing it. For example, maybe the inhale is twice as long as the exhale, and the retention after the inhale is twice as long as the retention after the exhale, and so forth, until there's literally probably a couple of hundred of these different sequences that can be done and explored if you want to make pranayama your path. But you basically have to make it your path if you're going to explore all of these difficult methods. But if you just want to practice pranayama as a support to mantra recitation or some other form of meditation, you may not choose to practice pranayama in all of these advanced or so-called advanced forms. And in fact, even if you choose just to practice pranayama, you might just choose to stick with a simple form. That's up to the individual. It's just like doing hatha yoga. You can just do the basic stretches and postures, or you can get really into it and do all of these mechanically very difficult poses. But are they really necessary? That's the question that each individual must ask, because for some individuals it is necessary, for some it isn't. For myself, I find I just can do this very simple sama pranayama, and I find it an excellent source for my own practice of meditation on mantras and visualizations and so forth. And I don't feel a particular need to do the various iterations of pranayama, but I have explored them a little bit, but never made them, or not for any length of time, a practice. my main focus is pranayama and mindfulness of breathing as a support for my meditation, which is analytical and mantra recitation. When we practice mindfulness of breathing or pranayama, we should be comfortable all the time. The breath is a precious resource for us, and it's also connected very intimately with our nervous system. So when we work with breath, we want to be very respectful of our emotions and our mind and our attitudes and our physical bodies. So that means we never use force in practicing any discipline. Well, we never use force in practicing any discipline, period, but particularly with the breath, because the breath is so much associated with the nervous system. So typically masters warn, their disciples to be extra cautious with practicing mindfulness of the breath, because of its association with the nervous system. It is not uncommon for overzealous students to get nervous disorders and lose sleep and have all sorts of disabilities because of practicing breath mastery in a way that's not correct. I would like to encourage everybody to practice some form of breath mastery, because I think that whatever meditation one is practicing benefits from it. I myself find it a very quick way to just cut through all the nonsense of my mind and focus. And sometimes when I'm particularly distracted, I will practice breath mastery as a way to just cut through all the nonsense. And once I've established a focus, then I'll move to my mantra or something like that. So I feel that both practices should be done. And if mindfulness of breathing or pranayama is not a main practice, it should be a supporting practice, because it's so excellent. So we could use it, have a primary practice, whichever that is, and a secondary practice. It's not one or the other by any means. So we'll conclude this talk on mindfulness of breathing and pranayama, and we'll have a part 2 that will include some basic instructions on pranayama. Namaste.